Hi, it's Cayman with S&B, and today we're going to be installing our S&B replacement tank on a 2011 to 2016 Ford Crew Cab Short Bed Powerstroke. If you've already received the tank, take out our installation card and scan this QR code with your smartphone camera, and it'll take you to our most up-to-date installation instructions. Okay, first step's going to be removing these hose clamps off the filler and the vent lines. This is a 8mm socket, and originally the hose clamps were pointed up. So we use this to get it started and loosened, and now we'll loosen these up completely with the flathead and then pull off the hoses. If your truck came equipped with a factory skid plate, that would be the first step to do even before you got it up on the lift or started to remove anything else. This truck did not come equipped, and so now we're going to move into removing this bumper bracket. Then we'll be removing the fuel lines off the top, then the straps. On some of the 2016 trucks, you'll see a different bumper bracket than this, and that would be a large one. That comes off as well. Next step, we'll be bringing up a jack to the bottom of the tank. If you're doing it on the ground, make sure you do have something supporting the bottom of the tank and have an empty tank of fuel. In order to gain access to the top of the tanks, we can remove the electrical as well as the feed and the return lines. We are gonna remove the front and the rear strap. We're gonna drop the tank about 6 inches so we can get our hands up and access the connectors. Now we're gonna slightly lower the tank so we can get our hand up and access the 3 connectors on the top. Be patient with the step as it is the hardest part of the installation, but I'm going to be removing the return as well as the feed lines on top of the tank and the electrical connector. These are a newer style type of connector, but essentially what I'm going to be doing is pulling out the lower part of the connector so it'll slide out, and I'm going to depress the top of this button. So squeeze, I'm going to press down and pull up on the connector. And then again, I'm going to do it for the return as well. Then for the electrical connector, I'm going to use a screwdriver to press out the red locking button on the connector, and I'm going to depress the tab and pull the electrical connector out. Once we have the tank dropped, it'll be easier to show you guys. Now that we have the 3 connectors off the top of the tank, we're going to be dropping the tank. This tank does have fuel in it, so I'm going to have a buddy assist me while dropping the jack. Now that we got the tank out of the truck, we're going to be removing the sending unit from the OEM tank and putting it into the S&B tank. And before we do that, we're going to place the S&B black O-ring into the O-ring groove so it's ready. Then we're going to hit this locking ring counterclockwise. And we're going to lift this out, being careful not to damage the float, and pour out the remaining fuel in the bucket. And we're also going to remove this green O-ring from the resistor card. Notice how we leave the OEM float on. And we're gonna face the tab on the sending unit to the arrow on the S&B tank. Pushing down, then placing the OEM locking ring on top. And to get the OEM locking ring started, we'll push down to get some down pressure and get it started underneath the teeth. Now we're going to be hitting this clockwise. Next step, we're going to be pressurizing the S&B tank to make sure we got a good positive seal in that O-ring. We're going to spray some soapy water around the O-ring area so we can see any bubbles if it is in fact leaking. And when we did lock that, hit the locking ring, we made sure it did pass the indentation on the receiving teeth. So it did pass underneath. My buddy's gonna be blocking off the 3 ports there. I'll be blocking off these 2 ports, and we'll be pressurizing the tank just a little bit, enough to make some bubbles appear in the O-ring area if there in fact was a leak. So just until the sidewalls start to expand, don't hear or see anything. So it looks like we got a good seal. Now we'll be bringing over the filler as well as the vent hoses onto the S&B tank. Remember how they're oriented on the OEM tank to make sure they're pointing in the same direction on the S&B tank. And before we put the filler onto the S&B tank, we're gonna slide in a one-way check valve that we'll show you in a second. Now we'll be sliding in the one-way check valve. You see the flow arrow is going into the tank. So slide that in there. Now we'll be zip tying the rollover valve hose to the filler. Make sure it's pointed up. So the electrical connector, it's in the unlocked position right now. If you slide this in, it'll be the lock position, so I pushed with the screwdriver on this side to unlock it, and then I depressed this tab and slid it off. These fuel line connectors, these are unlocked right now. Now they're in the lock position, but slide it out to be an unlock, and then depress the tab on the top, depress and pull up to get the connector off. Now that we're putting the S&B tank in, we are gonna be switching the fuel line placement. So we're gonna be pulling it out of the bracket and flip-flopping them to make it easier to reconnect onto the SIN unit and the S&B tank. Now we'll be swapping the feed and the return lines, and we're gonna be pulling them out of these 2 brackets and switching them. Now we'll be jacking the tank up into the truck, making sure to get this front roller valve line over the front cross member, as well as these rear filler and vent lines up and over the cross member as well, so they don't get pinched. Now before the tank gets all the way up into the truck, we're gonna be putting the front U-bolts over the frame. We'll slide it up and over, and then we'll clear this bolt. And leave it right there. Now I'm going to be reconnecting the feed and the return lines onto the SIN unit, as well as the electrical connector, making sure all the connections are locked. Now we'll be installing the middle strap on the S&B tank. Slide it in between the drive line and the tank on that side. Then line it up on this side with the cage nut. Now we'll be installing the rear strap. Now we'll be installing the front support. So just place the U-bolts through the 2 holes. We can get these on finger tight, and we'll run them in with 19mm socket. And the last step in the install is going to be taking that front hose that's connected to the front rollover valve and zip tying it to the filler neck, as well as reconnecting the hose clamps onto the metal filler neck. The install of this tank is complete. Please let us know if you have any questions. Our number is 909-675-1313. Thank you.